This is quite a thrill. Van Denton, this is great. Van, I got to tell you, you are somebody that I have wanted to talk to for many years. I've wanted to just sit around and, of course, talk about the weather, but wanted to talk to you too. You're a very interesting individual, and I want to thank you very much for being here on the Papa Dennis Show today. You doing good?
Doing great, Dennis. It's an honor to be with you. I always followed you before on radio for many years, so it's mutual. I've looked forward to our interview today.
Well, let's start out talking about the weather here and talking about this this hurricane. Are we going to get anything from it this weekend?
Yes, I do think the rain that you see tomorrow morning will be from it. Today, that system is actually working its way through Kentucky and Tennessee and bringing them some rain. And the pocket of rain associated with Laura's remnants will be coming through here between 7 in the morning and about 1 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. And when I say 7 to 1, I always think in terms of our viewing area. So it'll start crossing the Blue Ridge into Wilkes County around 7, and then reaching the Triad area around 10 to 11 in the morning. And then by 1 in the afternoon, it'll start exiting Alamance County. So from 7 to 1, we're going to be dealing with the remnants. And the remnants are going to include showers to the tune of probably 1/4 to 1/2 an inch. Some of those showers will bring some wind gust, generally 10 to 20, but there may be a peak gust of 30. And Dennis, the thing we got to watch tomorrow is we're on the right side of the remnants. And even though it is just remnants, it's weakened a lot. The storm's only got max winds now of 30 miles per hour. There's still a lot more spin and twist in the atmosphere than we typically have, because tropical systems are known for that if you're on the right side. And we will be on the right side of the movement tomorrow. So a weak tornado is possible in North Carolina. But the highest chances of that will be over the eastern half of our state in the afternoon and evening tomorrow. So from Raleigh-Durham to the coast, they'll stand a better chance. And that's because they'll have warmer temperatures in the afternoon, getting into the 80s to near 90, while we will be in the 70s in the morning when it comes through. There won't be as much instability to lift the air, but there's going to be a lot of spin above the ground. So if we can get a storm going, then it would be easier to have a tornado tomorrow than we normally would see.
You live for this time of year? Tornadoes, hurricanes, snowstorms, that sort of thing. I mean, it got to make your life more exciting, doesn't it?
It does, but I will be honest with you. I don't like tornadoes. I will say that they're interesting to cover. You really get focused in when that's happening. But I know the hardship they cause. So I really I would be fine living without them. Hurricanes are interesting to cover. But again, they make you miserable to cover. And as a property owner now of a place on the beach, I really now worry about it more than ever. So I don't like tornadoes and hurricanes for the inconveniences they cause people. Now, at the same time, I will say that snowstorms are a different story. I know they inconvenience people, but I can't help myself. I love snow.
Yeah. Van, how long have you been with FOX8 now?
I have been here for 30 years back in April, so I'm working on my 31st year here.
Wow. And how did you get started doing the weather? I mean, is this something as a kid that you were extremely interested in? How did you develop this?
Well, to be honest with you, back as a child in 1972, 73, that winter, I just happened to get a camera for Christmas. And back in the early 70s, our younger listeners wouldn't probably know what this is, but there were cameras known as brownie cameras. They were very popular back then. I bet Kate Garner over here in the West End probably doesn't know what a brownie camera is. Do you know what a brownie camera is? No, she's too young. But I had to Google it right now. Yeah, and the brownie camera was the name brand, or the name of what it's called, and it had the flash and everything. And I just got into taking pictures. And that particular year, right after Christmas, when I got that camera, I remember the first thing I took a lot of pictures of was a snow that we had in the winter of 73. We had some pretty good snows. And so I had those pictures, and I looked at them all the time. And we were out of school for a solid week and had so much fun playing in the snow. And then we had another one in February, and we were out for another week. And I just enjoyed snow so much, I got consumed by it. And I wanted to know, what does it take to get this stuff? Because this is great. And so I started learning a little bit more about the weather at an earlier age, because I really want to know what it takes to make snow. And so I got consumed by snow at an early age and started watching the weather people on TV, just hoping to hear them say it was going to snow. And by watching them nightly, I started picking up other things that were interesting to me to where I just got interested in weather altogether. And then I had my biggest break when I was 15 years old, but that's a story in itself. So if you want to share it, I'll share it. But otherwise, I want to make sure you have time to ask questions.
No. Share that. What are you talking about? Tell me the story.
Well, when I was 15 years old, I'd been interested in the weather for 8 years. And I had, because of my love for snow, I had started every year in September working up my winter weather outlook because I was fantasizing basically about the winter because I was tired of heat and humidity and I just wanted to see some snow again. And so I would put out my winter weather forecast and I would always come up with my ideas for what the winter was going to be like and give it to family. And on one particular year, TV station in the Raleigh market, which is the one I grew up watching, I grew up in Rocky Mount, had a rain gauge they were giving away. And I thought, well, I'd like to get a new rain gauge because I had run over my old one with the lawnmower in the yard. And so I wrote them and said, I want your rain gauge, but by the way, here's my winter weather outlook. And so I gave them my winter weather outlook, and I actually included my phone number on there in case they had interest in consultation from a 15-year-old kid. And to my surprise, the station actually reached out to me and asked if I would like to be on their program to give my winter weather outlook. So this was in 1980. I was 15, and those of you trying to do the math, I was born in 65. I'm 55. But I was on their program in October, and I gave my winter weather forecast. And the highlight of the forecast was the first snow. And I had predicted the first snow would be December 27th of 1980. And then I went farther and said that we would have 14 inches of snow, which was not a smart thing to say because that had only happened a handful of times in our history. But I did pick the date and committed to a number and then went home. And Dennis, the next day as a high school sophomore, my life changed because after being on that TV station, the next day, girls from school that I had never heard from, but I had noticed, started talking to me. And so at that point, I went from liking the weather to liking TV weather because I liked the attention as a 15-year-old. That was nice to have some attention. And the weeks passed, and as we got closer, it became a bigger deal. Every year before, it was just a few people that were family friends and people in our church would know about it. And but at this point, everybody in town knew about it because I'd been on TV to make this broadcast. And newspaper came out with an article that I had guaranteed snow for Christmas break, December 27th of 1980. And so when Christmas came, I was actually preoccupied and worried that if it didn't snow, how was I going to face everybody? And for a 15-year-old, that's a lot to deal with.
Yeah.
And so the night of December 26th, I went to bed and said my prayers. And you probably know what I prayed for. And I went to sleep finally. And the next morning when I woke up, it was to a phone call from a friend who said, holy cow, look out your window. And it was snowing. And the thing is the night before, no one had called for snow. This was one of those freak surprise snows. And I had gotten lucky. I called for it 2 months earlier, and I was lucky that I actually got invited to do it publicly on TV. I mean, what are the odds? The odds of winning a lottery is probably higher than getting lucky on an unexpected forecast 2 months out and getting a kid on a program to give it that they don't normally have kids on. So all of that came together at the right time. And when that snow happened, that TV station let everybody know that they'd actually had it on their air 2 months earlier from a kid. And so they invited me back on their program, and I went back on their program and got a lot of exposure from that. And then I pretty much wrote it from there on out. When I got back to school, everybody came to me for the weather. They thought that I had some edge that people didn't normally have. And I knew down deep I had just gotten lucky. I did do a little research as a kid that I knew enough to know that late December was more likely than early December. I like to play odds, and I understood that we had gone 6 years without snow in the month of December, and we were due. So a lot of those reasons is why I picked December that year, and it just worked out. But I used that to then get my first internship in television because they could tell that I'd really gotten into, or I was really serious about it. And so I got an opportunity at a station in New Bern when our family moved down there my junior year of high school, and I interned every day at the station and worked with a guy that was the main weather guy there named Skip Waters, and he was there for 35 years. And he passed away a few years ago. But he then gave me a break, and that's how I got into television. But that experience with that snow at 15 is what opened up all kinds of doors.
Plus, who knew that chicks were into weather, right?
Yeah, and I mean, as a 15-year-old young man, I mean, that's pretty much important in life.
That's right. That is a great story, man. Oh, and
that's also, by the way, why I started the Weather Kit program here back in 1997. I wanted to give, ever since I had that experience, I wanted other kids to have a chance to have a shining moment like that. So in 1997, when Frank Dill retired the year before, I went to management and said, I have something I've always wanted to do. And we started the band's Weather Kit program and did that up until early this year when this pandemic messed everything up and you can't have visitors in the building. So right now, that's been suspended for now, but that's a program that I started because of my experience.
Have you had any kids go on and continue and make meteorological a career?
I've had several that come through that are now meteorologists, have gotten degrees in meteorology. One of them, I was just watching some of his work on a Hurricane Isaias a couple of weeks ago. It's funny how now that storm's passed, we can all pronounce it. I had so much trouble the week of. But down in Florence Myrtle Beach market, a young man that is there. And I actually worked in that market 31 years ago before I came here. But and he's from High Point. And I've seen several have that interest. And I've also had a lot of interns from here that have come through over the years that are now working in some good markets as meteorologists. A lot of them are even chief meteorologists.
One thing I've wanted to ask somebody who would have the knowledge is, we often hear the European model and the American model when they're talking about big storms coming. What is the difference in those? Why is one better than another? Well,
the models have different calculations and formulas that they work off of. It takes money to run these models, a lot of research, a lot of science put into them. And, the more you put in and better scientists you have, the better model you supposedly will have. And so the European model has long been a great model. It's been very good. The American model is known as the GFS model, and a lot of money and investment's been made in that in recent years too. That model has improved greatly. And there's other models that are out now, like the National Blend model. There's a NAM model. I mean, there's many different models, and I like to look at all of them when the weather warrants to help me to see every possibility. But the models vary just based on what information and what formulas are in those models. And of course, with processing power being faster on computers now, they can crunch a lot more data than they used to. And by impact of that, we should have better results. And forecasting has greatly improved, and models have greatly improved because of all that.
Yeah, that was one thing I was going to ask you. Compared to when you first got into the business, how much better are the forecasts now? I mean, can you give a percentage? How much better?
There's not a real raw number I can give you, but I can do it in a way that you can kind of understand. I always tell people when you're doing a forecast, think about a dartboard. If you think of a dartboard and the bullseye is where you want to go in most games in darts. If you're asking me what the weather's going to be like 3 hours from now, most of the time I could be standing at the dartboard and I could just stick the dart in the bullseye. I mean, 3 hours from now, it's usually pretty easy. And you can stand like 2 inches away and throw it and put it right in the dart, right in the bullseye. If you ask me what it's going to be like tomorrow, I'll take a step back and I'll throw it. And I'm still going to hit the bullseye most of the time, but every now and then I'm going to be off. You ask me 3 days later, I'm going to take a few more steps back and I'm going to throw it. And I'm not going to hit the bullseye as often, but I'm still going to be hitting the board and getting relatively close and useful and some points. If you ask me what it's going to be like 7 days from now, I'm going to step back about 25 feet. And if you're really good at it, you may still occasionally hit the bullseye, but usually you're not. But you're hopefully going to hit the dartboard or real close to it. And that's the way forecasting is. But each day you go out, the error is going to change exponentially, because if one thing goes wrong, then it snowballs and everything else goes wrong, because everything for the future is relying on this happening tomorrow. So then you got that as your starting point for the next day. Well, if that starting point changes, then the next day is already going to be different. So forecasting goes downhill quickly as you go out in time. With all that said, I would say that right now a 7-day forecast is as accurate as a 5-day forecast was 10 years ago. I would say that a 7-day forecast now is as accurate as a 3-day forecast was 25 years ago. So things have improved greatly. Hurricane forecast, for instance, you look at that cone when we show a hurricane and the track and where it's going to go, and we show that margin of error with the cone. Yep. That cone is a lot tighter now than it used to be. Now the cone can be wider if it's a slow moving storm, because over so many days, each day the margin of error gets bigger. So if it doesn't travel very far, you'll see that cone widen out a lot. But over the long haul, each day the cone is much tighter than it used to be, because their forecast for hurricanes has also improved. So everything has improved dramatically in the last 10 years. And I think that trend should continue as computers get better and we have better data.
You mentioned Frank Deal a few moments ago. I grew up watching Frank Deal do the weather forecast, referring to High Point as High Pockets, I think it was. And he was a one-of-a-kind weather forecaster, wasn't he?
He was, and I'm so glad I had a chance to become a friend of him. I mean, we became very good friends, and I had a chance to get to work with him for 6 years. I learned a lot of things from him about the business and just enjoyed my time with him. He was unique. I never dreamed that I would get to work with him, but I knew who he was before I ever came here. Even though I grew up in the eastern part of the state and we could not pick up the triad stations from Rocky Mount, as soon as I got to college in meteorology school, everybody talked about what inspired them to become meteorologists. And anybody from this part of the state and in southwestern Virginia, he was the guy that they talked about. And they said, you've got to see him. And so a fellow from Freeze, Virginia, which is above Galax, and some of you that have watched me over the years have noticed that I have mentioned the town of Freeze, and it's because I have a very good friend that lives there. And I know that little town's an important town. It's a mill town that used to be really successful, and the mill shut down, and that town has kind of struggled from that, so now it's become more of a tourism place. But beautiful countryside, beautiful town. And so I mentioned that town sometimes. And we were at his home, and he said, we got to be in front of the TV at 6 so you can watch Frank Deal. So I remember the first night at his home, I watched Frank, and he was doing the weather, and it was during the fall, and Frank did a feature every night. He would, because back then they didn't have so many newscasts, so you had a lot more time to build that one special newscast. Now we do constant newscasts. So we're on the air a lot, and there's less time to produce more shows. But back then you could really put a lot of time into one show. And he had this graphic he had done on fall leaves. And I'd never seen anybody do something like this. And he was talking about what causes the leaves to color. And then he had a button on his clicker and all the leaves fell off the tree. And I thought that was the coolest graphic. And I said, okay, this is a neat weather guy. And then I enjoyed his presentation. And then when I got back to Raleigh, because they told me he loves snow, I said, okay, I really like this guy. In Raleigh, with my television with rabbit ears, I could add aluminum foil to the rabbit ears. You ever done that?
Yeah.
I put aluminum foil on the rabbit ears, and I had it all up over the ceiling, and I was able to get a much better signal, and I could get Channel 8. So back when I was in college in the early to mid 80s, I was able to get FOX8 or Channel 8 to ABC at the time on my rabbit ears, and I'd watch Frank do the weather every night. And Frank became one of my favorite weather people to watch, and I'd watch him all the time and enjoyed him telling a joke. And then when it came to snow, he talked about snow unlike anybody else I'd ever known, but he talked about it the way I wanted to hear it. And he had a good forecast because Frank was an actor. A lot of people may know he was an actor. He was a true actor. He didn't have the benefit of going to school for meteorology. So, but he was a smart man, and he was self-taught. And then he also was smart enough to know he could do things to make his show better. So he had a company called AccuWeather, and AccuWeather is a really good forecast service. And so they made the forecast for him, and then they communicated with him daily and told him why they did what they did, and he was very good at communicating that information. So he had very good forecast information, and so I'd watch him religiously. And if it's snow, I definitely didn't want to miss him. And so I was real familiar with him already. And then in 1986, while I was a junior at NC State in meteorology, a TV station that I had interned at in high school, WCTI in New Bern, had a weekend job opening. And so I applied for that job. And I went down there to interview for the job, and I did my demo tape. And I got the job, partly, I think, because I was an intern there in high school, and they already knew me. And so I worked with them. Well, Skip, who was the chief meteorologist then, who had also been a mentor to me in high school, grew up in Greensboro. He was born and raised in this area. And he knew all about Skip. So we talked about Skip then, too. I mean, we talked about Frank then, too. And so I still talked about him, but I was in New Bern, couldn't watch. And then I was in New Bern for 3 years, and I left and went to Florence, Myrtle Beach. And I went to Myrtle Beach. They put me on the beach in 1989 because the Florence market wanted to become larger. And at the time, Myrtle Beach in Horry County belonged to the Wilmington market. And so they thought if they put me at the beach in Myrtle, that we could promote that we had our own meteorologist at the beach, because no station had one there, because it was the Wilmington market and all their people were in Wilmington. We had the Florence market, our people were in Florence, but we had News Bureau in Myrtle, and then they put me in Myrtle to do the weather. So I did the weather, and they thought if we could pull enough audience, we could take the county away. And we did that year, because we had Hurricane Hugo come through the year I was there, and then we had the snowstorm of 1989 that dumped 15 inches of snow on Myrtle Beach right before Christmas, and we had 6-foot snow drifts on Ocean Boulevard. And our audience levels were so high that we took the county away, and it is now the Florence Myrtle Beach market since 1989. And I had planned to stay there longer, and I really wasn't looking. But to my surprise, in the month of February, I got a phone call from a lady that I had signed up with as an agent to help me find better jobs before I'd gotten to Myrtle. And she said, a TV station in Greensboro, High Point, Winston-Salem is interested in your work. And I said, well, that's where Frank Deal works. What station is it? She said, Channel 8. I said, that's Frank's station. And I said, what's happening to him? She said, well, he's getting older and he's going to retire, and they need to find someone. I'm like, oh my God. And so I came up here for the interview, and first thing I did was I went to Frank and I met him and shook his hand, first time I'd ever met him. And I told him I'd been watching him for years, and he actually was kind of bashful about it. He was a very nice man, and just didn't expect that kind of attention, which was surprising because I knew everybody knew him. And I just wanted to know how I was impressed with him. And I told him, I said, I hope I get to work with you. I said, I would love to work with you. And I got the job. And so we got to work together, and we became really good friends, and remained good friends until his passing.
How long did you get to work with him before he actually retired?
Well, I got here in 1990. He retired in 1996. So we worked together for 6 years. And
Wow.
then he passed away in 2010. So he lived another 14 years, and we remained friends and ate dinner together often and spent Christmases together as a family. And, he was a really good man.
Time to make another snow forecast, isn't it? Think you can come up with one and beat the one you did when you were 15?
Well, it's only August, so I haven't worked on it yet.
When do you come up with your snow forecast?
But when I was a kid, there was no internet. And so the way I came up with it was basically, as a kid, I would read a lot about our history. I love numbers. I'm not really a big person on reading novels, but I love to read statistics and numbers. I know that sounds kind of nerdy, but that's the way most meteorologists are. But I used to love studying statistics and facts and our history. And I like to look at trends, and I like to look at how one thing causes another thing. Cause and effect is big. And so when I used to make my forecast, it was a lot based on just history and climatology and what normally will happen following something, and then a lot of it was luck. And honestly, if you give people enough time, you're gonna have a little bit of everything in a 5-day period. It's kind of like the almanac when they do the weather. They give themselves the 22nd to 27th and say it's going to rain. Well, usually within a 5-day period there is going to be rain. So I mean, and if you say there's going to be a hurricane in September, that's usually pretty safe because that's the busiest time of year. But now when I do it, I do look at long range models, and there are models that you can look at runs out as much as 45 days into the future, and then you can get some ideas of patterns and trends that way too. And I'll look at that quite often in the winter, and sometimes I'll share that on television.
I got to commend you too on the photographs you did of recently of storms and lightning at the beach. Some of those were really quite good.
Thank you.
Is that a new hobby of yours?
Yeah, it is. I really enjoy photography. I've always liked taking pictures ever since I had that Brownie camera as a 7-year-old. I've just enjoyed photography, and now with cameras like they are, you can do so many things. And I've always enjoyed seeing lightning photography, and also, even though I never studied the astronomy, because astronomy and meteorology are not related, I still find it interesting. So I love photography of the night sky and the Milky Way and things like that too. I just think it's beautiful. I just like those things.
Yeah. Well, you did a real good job. I enjoyed looking at those on your Facebook.
Thank you.
Van, this has been great. I really appreciate you taking the time out of. I know you have an incredibly busy day, and taking the time to talk with us here this afternoon. I'd love to do it again sometime. I hope you will. Maybe later on as we get closer to winter and maybe some storms are coming up. I'd love to talk with you some.
Yes, I'd be happy to. It was a lot of fun for me. And when you watch in the future, and your listeners watch that have been around for a long time, if you ever notice every now and then when I do the temperatures, if I say Burlington, you might hear me say Burlington.
Yeah,
that's one of those things Frank used to say. He did high point, high pockets. Yeah. Burlington was one of his too, and I promised him the day before he passed away that I would make sure he was never forgotten. I was with him the day before he passed, and I was holding his hand, and I couldn't know for sure if he was hearing me or not. But they told me they knew he was going to pass, and I was with him, and I just told him that I appreciated him as a friend, appreciated all he had done for me, helping me here. And I told him that I promised I will never let him be forgotten. And as I held his hand when I said that, I felt him squeeze my hand back. So I knew he heard that, and I wanted to make sure I always remember him.
Dan, thank you very much for talking with us, and we'll do this again sometime.
Thank you, Dennis. Have a great weekend.
All right. Thank you. Van Denton from FOX8, WGHP, our guest today on the Papa Dennis Show.